Audio article by the Common Constitutionalist entitled The Women's March, brought to you in its entirety by George Soros. The internet, conservative media in particular, is blowing up over the New York Times article showing the spontaneously organized grassroots Women's March, which took place this past weekend around the globe, was anything but spontaneous or grassroots. Somehow, in what would otherwise be an impossible task logistically, women's marches sprung out of seemingly thin air to take place all over the globe. Many cities and towns in the U.S. took part: Washington, D.C., New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, and many others. There were marches in Paris, Buenos Aires, Sydney, New Delhi, Mexico City, and even Antarctica. Who knew there were so many dopey females who enjoyed wearing crocheted women's parts on their heads? However, I did not see any reports of women marching in Iran, Saudi Arabia, or any Muslim-dominated country. Just an observation. Osra Q. Nomani wrote in the Times article of just how spontaneous the groundswell of support for the march was. The Guardian has touted the Women's March on Boston as spontaneous action for women's rights. Another liberal outlet, Vox, talks about the huge spontaneous groundswell behind the march. On its website, organizers of the march are promoting their work as a, quote, grassroots effort with, quote, independent organizers. Nomani writes that after researching the genesis of this grassroots effort, the independent organizers weren't so independent after all. The entire event was brought to us by 56 separate organizations, all controlled by the devil himself, George Soros. Although a few groups innocently got caught up in the hype, the driving force behind the march were all the typical radical leftist organizations that always seem to be present, sponsor, and organize these hate-filled liberal events. And all owe allegiance and funding to one man, two if you count his son Alex, who is actually worse than his father, and one organization, Soros's Open Society Foundation. Groups like Planned Parenthood, MoveOn.org, the National Action Network, the ACLU, American Atheists, National Resource Defense Council, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Council on Islamic Relations all had a hand in the march. May I ask, why would CARE, the radical Islamic organization which is merely a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, whose ultimate goal is to install Sharia law in America, be involved in a woman's march? There is no greater enemy to women than Sharia. Yet they are one of the so-called partners. Ditto for the National Resource Defense Council, which is just a leftist environmental group. A spokeswoman for the Devil's Blanket organization, Open Society, said that, quote, we support a wide range of organizations, including those that support women and minorities who have historically been denied equal rights, many of whom are concerned about what policy changes may lie ahead, unquote. May I ask another question? If they are indeed protesting for women's rights, why don't they wait until President Trump actually does something rather than expending all this effort on policy changes that may lie ahead? Answer: this march, like other marches we will see in the future, have nothing to do with what they claim. For the ignorant women like the Hollywood elites who stood up and spewed their vitriol, this was all about their blind hatred of President Trump and sour grapes over Hillary's crushing defeat. However, for Soros and his radical Open Society Foundation, it is as it always is: to disrupt nation-states, do away with traditional values, global corruption, conflict creation, regime change, crashing economies for personal gain, and, of course, wipe Christianity from the face of the earth. I guess I know why CARE is involved. Thank you for listening.